Welcome. Today we're going to take a look at Java database integration, how we can actually work to make our Java projects talk to database projects. That's how we make that happen. So we got some vocab that we have to make sure we cover as part of this. We have the connection string, the driver, indices, ResultSet, ResultSetMetaData, an SQLException, and a statement. These are some of the vocab terms you need to make sure you understand and can use as you work with Java database integration. The first thing we're talking about is how we can actually access the database. It depends on a few specific things. You want to make sure you have a database you have access to. I know, crazy. You have to have a driver you connect with. It's a piece of software, and you have to have a connection string or a URL at a minimum. So those are the minimum pieces you have to have. Some systems might also require other additional connection information, like say, for example, a VPN. The database I'm working with in my class right now requires this specifically. And these components should be secret and not included in the source control or your shared things that you actually work with inside that. So when you're talking about accessing a database, make sure you keep that stuff separate and private. It's a good idea to have that handled. When we're talking about a driver, I'm not talking about a car driver. No, a driver is the vendor-specific piece of software that we actually use to allow your Java project to connect to the database engine you're working with. And so the driver can be a jar file that you have locally to your project or hard drive, or it can be handled with a dependency management tool like Maven. You need this in your project. This is not skippable. You have to have this handled. And you want to make sure you also do this before you even worry about configuring your configuration. You want to make sure you actually handle your driver itself before you even bother working with your connection string. So get this taken care of immediately. This is the first thing to do. Now your connection string is the actual way we talk to the database via Java. So we've got some specific pieces for that. We have specific parts we have to work with. It's a connection string because it's a string piece of information, but it's also a URL, so you'll be working with that. And how you work with this depends on what database vendor you're talking with. So MySQL, MariaDB, MongoDB, Oracle, Microsoft SQL Server, these are all different types of database vendors that have different requirements for their strings. The components, however, include a protocol, the host name, port maybe, the user, a password, and maybe even an SID. These are pieces of information you need to have to actually make that connection string. Here's a MySQL connection string example. So I have this .connection MySQL is assigned to the protocol, and so JDBC:MySQL, and then the address of it. Because this is just a quick local project, it's on localhost for the port for the host name for that. Really easy. And then I have my datasecrets.sql database, the database I don't want to expose to the outside use, and then the interrupt on that with a question mark and user equals, and the database secrets.username_SQL for the value that I don't want to expose again, and then the other interrupt with ampersand password equals, and then the password for that. So you can see how it's directly a URL style approach right there with that for the MySQL. When we're talking about an Oracle connection string example, we have the same kind of approach. I have this connection string is assigned, and then JDBC:/Oracle:/, and then the username, and then a slash, then the password @sign, and then the database secrets.hostname. Again, I'm not exposing any of the information I don't have to, and then a colon, the port, and a colon again, and the Oracle SID value. And then a MongoDB connection string example, we have this connection MongoDB is MongoDB plus SRV:/, and then my data secrets.username Mongo, and then a colon and @ + data secrets password Mongo and my data secrets.MongoDB, and then plus, and then I've got this gobbledygook stuff for a URL to work specifically with that Mongo installation, and then the Mongo database name again as the end of that string. So again, the connection string examples vary based on vendor. Here's 3 specific examples that you can actually use to make that happen. An SQLException is also something we have to worry about. So an SQLException is a specific subclass of exception, gives us more information specifically about what we're doing with when we're talking about the queries using SQL. One of the ones we specifically get is the SQL state, so we can get the state of that database. And so 42,000 is a syntax error in the query for Oracle. And an error code, this is the database vendor specific information like Oracle, MariaDB, Microsoft, etc., that shows the error code that is thrown from it. It makes it really easy to search in there. Like, oh, why is that error happening? Oh, there's the error code, I can pass to that. Okay, and indices. This is, now you've worked with indices before, but unlike regular Java where indices usually start at 0 for all the data structures, the collections types, arrays, etc. In indices, when you're talking about database line, indices start at 1. 1. Keep that in mind. It's really critical. You have to make sure you handle that properly because otherwise you're going to have lots of problems that will happen. Especially when you're looking at linking an index-based structure like an array or an array list or a vector to some database component like a result set, you have to make sure you properly adjust the index as needed. Okay, keep that in mind. The connection. So the connection is the actual component we work on Java to make the connection between that database. And so it's how we connect to it. And connections should be limited, have minimal access. We don't want to spread this all over the place. And so we want to have that so it handles basically inside a try with resources block to make sure we have good coding practice so it automatically closes when we're done with it. I recommend using private static methods for handling and working with your connections so you can have the minimal exposure of that so it's handled in a nice, really clean and objective way for It's handled in a really clean and simple way for your code. It makes it really easy to track through where you're working with it. And your connections get access via the static factory method driverManager.getConnection, and you supply them with the connection string. So that's how we make that happen. So here's an example right here using an Oracle connection. So I have a private static method like I was talking about, which returns a connection, and it's called connect to Oracle. I know, creative name. And I pass it the reference to the controller and then the connection string as parameters. I initialize my connection and assign it null because I have to have a value assigned to my return variable automatically. I then use a try block to assign a better value to it. In this case, my Oracle connection is assigned to driverManager.getConnection, that factory method we were just talking about, and then the connection string. If that gives us a problem, we throw the SQLException, and I process that with my handle error method. But if it doesn't throw any exceptions, then I've got my connection made, and I can return that connection. I can use that in my other more public available methods of my data connection project. So a statement is also part of this, and the statement is how we initialize based on that connection. It should also be closed when finished, so you want to put in that same try with resources block. And if you want to process your results more easily with that, with your result set, you can make sure you initialize that statement with parameters that can support the scroll and sensitivity and read-only concurrency. Then you can actually go back and forth through the result set very nicely. I know, crazy. And you use the statement itself to execute the query that you want to actually get information on. And so a result set is the piece of information that actually does a lot of the work of the query. It's what the data comes to us in Java, that form. That's the data type for anything we get from an executed statement object. And by default, only supports that one-way traversal, but if I use the parameters to initialize it, we can have that back and forth approach with the scrollable, and use those parameters we just talked about to modify this. Now, remember, when we're talking about a result set, not everything is retrieved at once. That result set is open and retrieving data until you finish processing it. So you want to make sure you're actually going through and processing the result set before you assume it's all done. And you can't find the total size of the result set until you finish processing it. So make sure you process before you try and actually get the final values for it. When we're processing the result set, we're going to use a while loop with that using the .next call on that result set, and that will return true as long as there's still data in that result set to be processed. Again, that's why we keep doing this over and over on time. You access it via fields in the result method. So we have a get string, which takes index, or get int, or to get double, or to get boolean, whatever you want to look at, or any of the other get types on database type values that are supported in Java as well. Pass it in the index to grab that value. If you're not sure about the type, use the get string because everything can be parsed to a string. It makes life really easy, especially the first time you're working on it. You can access your current row with the getRow method call, and you can check to see if you're done with a .last call. So you can see if it's finished. So it's a great way to process that. Your metadata is how you can actually get the information about that. So ResultSetMetaData is the information, of course, about the information. The same idea of metadata all the time. This has information about our columns, including the names, the data type, the label, the scale, and the precision. So this is really helpful in understanding what exactly we're working with, whether it's the number, what kind of value we're working with, all that kind of information. Metadata is your friend. I recommend extracting it and using it to do anything you want to do that's cool. I hope this is a good review of how to work with Java database integration. Take a look at some of the other videos that have a little more detailed example of how to go over the process. Thanks again. Cheers to see you next time. Have a good day. Bye-bye.